Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Steve Lewis, and I'm a Senior Director of Risk Tech based here in the UK. Thank you very much for joining us, and welcome to this Risk Tech webinar, which is the first of Series 7. Now, we regularly ask you what topics you'd like us to cover, and as a result, we'll be presenting on 4 of those most popular requests in this series. The first of the topics is the subject of today's webinar, which is about the cybersecurity of operational technology. That is industrial automation and control systems. Hopefully we can provide some useful and practical insights for you. The webinar will take about an hour, so that's around 45 minutes for the presentation and about 15 minutes for Q&A. We have muted everybody so that the sound won't be distorted by any background noise. If you'd like to ask questions, and we really do encourage you to ask questions, it's a great way of getting feedback on the contents, then please use the Q&A function. I'm sure you're all familiar with Zoom, but you just hover your mouse on the screen, you pull down the bottom, and you'll see the ribbon at the bottom, and that Q&A speech bubble. Just click on that, type in your question, and do that as you go along. And what I'll do is I'll keep track of the questions, and we'll aim to cover as many of them as we can at the end of the session and within the hour we have available. Okay, I'd now like to briefly introduce Risk Tech. For those of you who don't know us, apologies to our regular participants who've heard this many times before. Don't worry, I'll be quick. So as Risk Tech, what we do is we help our clients to manage health, safety, security, environmental and business risk, predominantly in sectors where the impact of loss is high. We do that through 5 business lines, so that's consulting, specialist risk management services, learning, so that's online and classroom training and postgraduate education, resourcing, so that's about providing specialist associates to work at client locations to help fill a resource or skill shortage. We also undertake industrial and vendor inspections and assessments as part of asset integrity management programs. And we also conduct research and development in the field of risk and safety management. Okay, I'd like to introduce our presenter today, Stephen French. Well, it says Stephen there, but rather like myself, he calls himself Steve. It's only his mother who calls him Stephen, and that's usually when he's done something wrong. That's my experience anyway. Anyway, Steve is a principal consultant, information and cybersecurity, and he's based in our London office in the UK. He's got over 18 years of security experience across a number of industry sectors. That includes civil nuclear, defense, transportation, education, and also oil and gas. So his areas of expertise include security risk management, security leadership and management, information and cyber risk assessment, and industrial control systems cybersecurity. And there's his email address if you would like to get in contact with him after the presentation. Okay, over to you, Stephen.
All right, thanks, Steve. So, quick introduction. I thought we'd get going with the normal kind of ice-breaking thing. Unfortunately, we're not face to face, but all is good. So if I can just get the Zoom poll pulled up, we'll just find out what different people are here.
Yeah, I was just jumping there, Steve. I noticed we got security repeated twice there, so I think that second one, security risk manager engineer, I think that should really say safety. Just in people
Yes,
wonder why we've doubled up there.
So we've got a good little selection and cross-section of people there. So hello to all of you. Hopefully the content of this webinar will be of value, and we'll move on, and I'll introduce what we're going to be talking about. So, as part of this webinar, just to give you a bit of background as to why we put this one together, this is actually the first in a series of sort of cybersecurity related webinars, articles, and social media posts that we're going to be putting out over this year. It's one of the areas of sort of risk management that we're getting a lot of interest in at the moment, so we thought it would be good to share our thoughts with everyone, kind of just work out some of the different bits and pieces around cybersecurity and how people can start getting this integrated within their businesses. So first of all, we'll look at sort of safety and security, and we'll put some definitions. We'll have a quick discussion on kind of how it should be. Then we'll start looking at some of the problems with the cybersecurity industry and operational technology. This is very much based on some of the conversations we've had with clients and prospective clients. So we kind of uncovered some hard truths about the cybersecurity industry itself and how we go about doing business. Then we look at the next logical thing, how we can fix it, what we can do to kind of turn that around, and how we can get cybersecurity implemented much better, how we can build the confidence and the understanding around cybersecurity within operational technology as well, and also how we as risk tech and we as consultants within the business are striving to be better and sort of getting this understanding and this operations underway. Let's start with really basic definitions. Safety and security. I'm probably teaching most of you to suck eggs with this one, but obviously we have that safety element here, which is largely the protection against accidents and hazardous scenarios. So it's mostly a people-focused activity, obviously with the environmental impacts in there as well. And I've picked up a couple of Cambridge Dictionary definitions here. So as Cambridge Dictionary definition for safety is a state in which or a place where you are safe and not in danger or at risk. Security, we're looking mostly against the protection against malicious acts. So this is, as Cambridge Dictionary says, protection of a person, building, organisation or country against threats such as crime or attacks by foreign countries. Now, whilst that is quite a wide-ranging statement, we can also extend that a little bit further. Security obviously is not always just about attacks by foreign countries. We do also protect against sort of human error. So we have this overlap with safety and security that comes in. Safety, very much that skills-based errors and mistakes. Security is very much the accidental insider threat that we can face. And this leads us to probably one of the most important points from the presentation, actually. So that safety and security are complementary and they can lean on each other. Security enhances safety by considering those malicious scenarios. And it gives you a good holistic view of protecting people and assets. Which leads us quite nicely on to what is IT and what is OT, information technology and operational technology. We see these phrases bandied about quite a lot. So let's get at the definition out of the way quickly. Information technology, most people understand this. This is the computers, the networking equipment, the IP-based sort of telephones that you use, all of your standard enterprise kind of technology stuff that you would use for your day-to-day operation and sort of your business information. When we start to get into operational technology, we start to get a little bit more confused sometimes in exactly what that covers. And operational technology covers a massive range of things. So it can be industrial control systems, sort of like process, energy, chemical systems. So if we've got sort of the oil rig up there, huge amount of different control systems on there. And this can range from your safety instrumentation systems and your distributed control systems, all the way to your fire and fire suppression systems. So it's quite a range of equipment that you'll have on there. In the automotive and transportation worlds, you have sort of like the safety systems that are built into all of this. Basically anything that would have that physical impact in the world. Healthcare as well, great example for this one, and I'll come on to some of the issues that healthcare have had as well later on in the presentation. We also have the Internet of Things, which is this massive sort of like growth area. A lot of things are becoming smart or connected to the internet. And it surprises a lot of people to realize that these are actually considered to be operational technology as well. And a large section of the Internet of Things remit and domain, there are a lot of products out there that do have direct physical impact on people. Basic definition: with operational technology, generally speaking, if it goes wrong, it has a direct real-world physical consequence. And again, this can put individuals at risk of harm. Moving on, another area of confusion that we often face when talking about security and sort of cybersecurity is the different domains that exist within security. Information and cybersecurity are often confused as being one of the same things. But actually not. Coming from an information and cybersecurity background, I get quite passionate about this one. But information security is about the protection of business information, including sort of any data privacy requirements that you may have. Cybersecurity is very specific, and it's almost a subset of information security. It's about the protection of computer-based assets, whether that's information data stores, databases, IT systems, or OT systems, such as your distributed control systems and that kind of thing. And that applies for, as I said, anything that is computer-based would come under that cybersecurity element of that. Physical security domain within this area. So this is sort of the protection of physical business assets. Usually this is the buildings, the people, the equipment. And this kind of thing is typified by where you will see sort of CCTV, access control, fences, gates, ditches, all of that good physical security stuff. Personnel security. So this is where we're looking at the protection of businesses from individuals with malicious intent. So this will take the form of sort of background checks, national security vetting where the regulations require it. Also looking at sort of maintaining and monitoring well-being with staff as well, all part of that sort of view of personnel security and making sure that you have no insider threats. And finally, we have sort of the supply chain security domain as well. And this is about the protection of business from a compromised supply chain. And we will start to talk about supply chain security at a later point this year on one of the webinars. We'll touch upon it. But this is very much sort of making sure that any of the products, services, or even consultants that you're using as part of your supply chain within your business also have a good understanding of all of the domains of security, and that you're not opening your sort of attack surface, or you're not exposing yourself to vulnerabilities through your supply chain. So why are all these domains important? So they all fit together. It's this concept of holistic security, and this is becoming a very strong concept within the industry at the moment. We have all of these different aspects that are needed to create a protected asset. So the type of the asset doesn't always matter. Each type of security is always needed. So you will always need some governance around your security. You'll always need some information and personnel, physical, cyber, and supply chain security around your asset. But the level and goals upon which you apply those different domains, they will change depending on your business goal and the asset itself. But most importantly, and I think one of the reasons why most people are here at the moment, is that cybersecurity has become one of the most critical defense for almost all assets. And that's because most assets now in business are becoming computerized in one way or another. So again, the different types of security should no longer be seen as separate layers. Connected elements of a security as a whole. They all work to protect your asset. So I mentioned that cybersecurity is getting a lot of attention at the moment because of that move to sort of computerized systems. So why are we getting this attention on cybersecurity? Well, the world has moved, as everyone knows, to being sort of very connected. We're always on our phones. We always have sort of remote access a lot of the time to our work environments. And a lot of the cyber physical systems, or the OT systems that are in use around the world now, are starting to get connected. And that starts leaving bigger vulnerabilities that are out there in terms of the opportunities for threat actors to access systems that they shouldn't access. We have this changing landscape as well at the moment. We all know that COVID's changed things quite dramatically. And whereas before, engineers in sort of like regulated industry would have very limited remote access to solving issues, actually what we found over the last couple of years is this has now increased, and the scope of this remote access level has also increased as well due to COVID and due to the working from home environment that we're all in. And these all sort of fall together to create this increasing public awareness and sort of regulatory scrutiny of what's happening. We also have the cyber attacks that are on the rise as well, and these are becoming, again, more and more widely reported. This slide was put together before the current situation in the Ukraine, but even there you can see, they suffered a string of attacks between 2015 and 2017 on different power cuts and their banking systems. We had WannaCry as well, and this is probably the one that people in the UK will most associate with. In the NHS, 80 out of 236 of the NHS trusts were affected, and it affected equipment that was needed for vital operations and vital diagnostic equipment such as MRI machines. So it's these cyber attacks are having real impacts on people's physical lives. And then last year we had the Colonial Pipeline, April last year, a single compromised account. It's a ransomware attack and it shut the pipeline down. The interesting thing for most people when it comes to operational technology with the Colonial Pipeline one is that the ransomware attack actually wasn't on the operational technology systems. It was actually on the information technology systems. But because of a lack of understanding of being able to monitor into their OT systems, they shut the pipeline down just as a precaution. And it took them a reasonable amount of time to go through all of their OT systems and make sure that they were clear and clean before restoring operations. And that had a big impact on them. So all of this bad stuff is happening and all of this good connected stuff is happening, but what are we actually doing to try and make it more secure? So different organizations and different sort of government-based authorities are looking at producing different standards. I've listed a few of them up here for reference. So we've got sort of the international standards that are now coming out. IEC 62443 for the process industries. Very, very popular, very common standard to find out there now, and very comprehensive and powerful one as well. Last year we had ISO 21434, which for some reason I always find a mouthful. This was cybersecurity in the automotive industry. This one was a brand new one that embodied a lot of the learning that came from sort of 62443 and some of the functional safety elements as well from the partner standard to this in the automotive industry for safety. We also have very specific ones as well. So IEC 62645 was developed for the civil nuclear industry, and that was based a lot on IAEA guidance at the time as well. We also have cybersecurity and safety regulations. So cybersecurity is built in there in IEC 61508 and 511. We're starting to see different health and safety organizations around the world also introduce this. So for example, in the UK, the Health and Safety Executive have got OG 0086, based reasonably heavily on 62443 processes, but they've added some of their own sort of twists on this as to where the particular scope and focus of these risk assessments lie. Finally, probably one of the most well-known ones out there is Nist over in America. Produce an amazing raft of sort of safety regulations, standards and guidance. Brilliant resource for anyone that needs to go and look at that kind of thing. We also have the UN and international agencies issuing different guides as well. So like the IAEA issue their own cybersecurity guides for nuclear-based products. And as I said, we're starting to see the government also issue a lot of guidance and standards as well. But what we're finding when we're talking to people is industries are still struggling to understand how all this fits together. There's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of standards out there. But getting all of that guidance and all of that understanding together in one place is where we are seeing the difficulties. So I did say that part of this was around some of the problems within the cybersecurity industry. And this leads us on to our second Zoom poll of the day. And these words that will pop up in a moment, these came from engagements with current and previous clients. So it will be interesting to see sort of if you're feeling the same kind of approaches and same kind of issues as they did. Yeah, the complicated one there isn't a surprise, and I'll come on to some of the other aspects of the complicated thing in a moment as well. It's quite nice to see that missing the point is fairly low. We do as an industry and as consultants think we try to get what businesses are after. But again, it does show that there are people out there that think cybersecurity at the moment is missing the point and isn't actually achieving what it is that businesses need. So we'll start to have a bit of a work through some of these. And if we'll move on to the next slide. So what are the problems that we've kind of spoken to clients and prospective clients about and kind of gotten this impression about? So the first one I think is the cybersecurity industry is very bad at talking in an understandable way. I think a lot of the stuff that we do, a lot of the standards that we use can lack a little bit of consistency. So for example, if you would take something as simple as the definition of likelihood, that definition of likelihood can change depending on which standard that you're reading. And that really causes a bit of confusion in people. And sometimes it can confuse the consultants as well when we're talking with a client that's got a particular viewpoint sort of on likelihood and a particular definition in mind. They may be using a very specific definition that's come from the safety world. It might not quite align. That's where we have these different meanings to different words. There are different approaches as well. So cybersecurity has developed its very own unique way of approaching some topics and some issues. We have slightly different ways of doing risk assessments, and we need different considerations within there as well. And again, that can confuse issues if we're dealing a lot of the time with people that are very much sort of functional safety based. Those approaches, it takes time to find that balance in between the two and for things to fit. We also have this this amazing ability to sort of sometimes put this cloak and dagger approach over. And this isn't just sort of the consultancy side of things, but there's this approach in business as well. Whereas if you have a cyber incident, it's to hold it close and to not really talk about it and not let people know about it. And I absolutely get and understand that, but it's a very different take to potential sort of safety issues where those kind of safety things tend to be fed up to regulators, and it's a bit better in terms of sort of exposure and people understanding the kind of stuff that's going on. We also have this confusion that IT security sometimes equals OT security, and it doesn't. So there are very different sort of confidentiality, integrity, availability requirements here for OT systems. Confidentially, by and large, is much less important. And when things do go wrong, there are massively different consequences, and we kind of touched upon those at the beginning of the presentation. So it's really important to be aware that you may have a really good understanding of IT cybersecurity within your business, but it may not directly apply to OT cybersecurity. There are subtle differences. And possibly one of the biggest ones is doing something which most IT security teams will do on a regular basis. They'll go and test something, or they'll go and patch something. With OT cybersecurity, particularly with a lot of legacy systems, if you try and test something and run a network test over towards something, it won't cope. It'll either shut down or do something that you're not expecting. And again, patching as well in OT cybersecurity systems, particularly if you're in a heavily regulated industry, introducing a patch to a system that's operating is not something that you can do simply. So different aspects and considerations between the two. We also have that difference of maturity between IT and OT cybersecurity as well. So in the IT world, most of the security considerations and most of the security standards and governance is pretty well established by now. OT cybersecurity has almost rested on its laurels a little bit with sitting there and kind of understanding that it's generally separated from the enterprise networks and connections are limited. But now we're moving into the new connected world and sort of remote access for OT engineers. That's changing quite significantly. So that maturity needs to now catch back up with IT cybersecurity as well. Coming back to sort of the cybersecurity risk management, sometimes it's seen as quite expensive. And people have touched on the complicated thing there and very technical at times. And part of the problem with this is that We tend to, as consultants, we like to look at the details, and sometimes we need to just take a moment and look at the higher level aspects of security risk management and understand exactly what it is that the businesses need. And this is kind of where we get these complicated and technical answers coming out. These can be very sort of technical. We can be talking about very specific patches or ports that are open. And in a lot of cases, the audience for the reports or for the risk assessments that may not be in their area of expertise. So we need to be a little bit cognizant of that. We're also lagging behind from safety risk management as well. So as I said before, we don't talk about our vulnerabilities and incidents, and there's lack of regulatory reporting requirements that are around. So for example, sort of in the UK, we have the RIDDOR sort of regulations that mean that we have to report certain incidents and accidents in different sites. We have sort of a control of major accident hazards as well. And that all means that safety starts building this historical information, and it starts learning from a much wider base. Whereas in cybersecurity risk management, you tend to find that each individual business is almost doing its own thing, and it holds on to that security risk management process and the results that it gets in a very tightly controlled way, hence feeding into that cloak and dagger approach that I was talking about. Finally, the documentation that we need in cybersecurity is very different. Cybersecurity for OT systems, we need a huge mix of information, and if I've got any of my my clients on here at the moment, they're probably nodding their heads at the moment going, yeah, you ask for everything, it's great. Not. So we have that mixture of sort of operational and procedural and business and technical information, because we need to fully understand the security of an asset. So when we look at cybersecurity, we don't need to just look at the unit or the asset itself in terms of the computer-based element to it. We also need to look at the physical security and who can access it and where it's located and how all of the different governance processes work around this, particularly in terms of supply chain, who has access to this as it's getting installed and commissioned. So it's quite a big range of different information that we need. And this is sometimes a little bit different from the safety sort of risk assessments and the HAZOPs that are being done. We also need longer to do this as well. So it takes us quite a while sometimes to do this deep dive into a system, and I'll come back onto the concept of deep diving a little bit later into the presentation. But it does mean that we have to look very carefully at the documentation, because a lot of the legacy systems in particular that we work on, security wasn't designed into them. So the security controls that are being used on different systems may not actually be part of the system we're risk assessing. For example, if there's no ability to put a password on a particular piece of kit that would benefit from a password, the company may have actually just put a lock on the door, but without knowing that that lock's on the door and that the key system is controlled to that door, or the access control is part of a managed process, we're not seeing where that mitigating control is located. So this is why we need that massive wide approach to things. So how, as an industry, do we fix this? So I spent a little bit of time sort of thinking about this last year. So I joined Ristech at the beginning of last year, and I kind of like started talking to some of the clients, the existing clients, and this kind of led me on to, how do we help? How do we get this working properly? What as an industry do we need to do? And this is also based on sort of previous experience that I've got in different industries as well, in different sectors. It's not exclusive to sort of the industries that Ristech operate in. I came up with three things. So let's match the language, match the goals, and let's make things familiar. And I think they're all quite important. I'll sort of touch on each of these now. So matching the language. So this is about using the same definitions. I mean, I've put here use the same definitions as safety, but actually it could be the same definitions that any particular discipline within your business is using. Whoever we're engaging with, from a security consultant's point of view, we need to be understood. We need to be making sure that we're using the right definitions. We need to be consistent in our approach. So if we start doing a particular methodology with a business, coming in 6 months later and doing a completely different methodology is not the best way to do it, because it just creates confusion. we need to introduce concepts clearly as well, and hopefully this this series of sort of webinars and articles will help a little bit with this matching of the language and some of the concepts. And we need to learn the safety and business language that an organization uses. So all of these good words that you will find, so security, safety, hazard, risk, threat, all of these can have very slightly different and subtly different meanings to different organizations. And in fact, in many cases around the world, safety and security are actually the same word. There's no specific security word. It all comes under that safety approach. So how about matching the goals? Well, again, this is about as an industry understanding what the most important thing to a business is, really drilling down to understand what their safety and what their security goals are, so that as you're going through any sort of consultancy or any cyber risk assessment with this business, and flipping this onto the other side as well. So any businesses that are engaging with consultants are clearly stating their goals and their safety goals, so that we all understand the direction of travel, that we can tie all of this together and actually end up with a product or a solution that works really well for the business and gives you what you need. That's what I said here. You know, the goals of the business are the most important consideration in giving that right level of security. So it helps us as an industry give the right level of recommendations and tells us which language to communicate in, whether or not we need to speak in that higher level business sort of approach, whether we need to talk in a safety way, or whether we need to be very specific if we're engaging with security within an organization. It just helps us frame how it all works. And finally, yeah, how do we make things familiar? Well, there are a lot of familiar processes out there, and I've pulled up two here as sort of examples. There's a lot of HAZOPs and LOPAs, massively popular different processes here for different industries. And I'm kind of, you know, we've got the oil and gas rather disastrous picture there. We may have chosen a slightly better one, but the picture that's kind of really emphasizing the fact that, you know, it is hazardous operations that we're looking at, and kind of, you know, the levels and layers of protection that go around things. So we can try and use similar processes so that people are comfortable. We're not having to do a retraining exercise every time that we start doing cyber risk assessments. And again, where businesses have existing risk management language, we use that language and those definitions in our communications with them. We build them into the processes that we use. We take the time to understand what outputs are needed. So this is vitally important. So where we have those outputs, you know, for example, we're engaged in HAZOPs, we can talk about very specific technical or governance or process sort of issues that are coming out from these sort of cyber HAZOPs. But actually, are the recommendations that we're giving, is the output that this product or solution or piece of consultancy work is doing, is it meeting the requirements of the organization? Is it helping to reduce that overall risk and improve the risk management of an organization? And can we integrate into existing safety management systems? You know, if they exist and they're following international standards, then there is that element of asking for security as part of those standards. So we can integrate and make sure that we're part of that business process. We can also learn from safety, and I touched upon this earlier. There's a lot of maturity and concepts that exist within the engineering safety worlds. And I've just put a small handful up here. So from systems theory, if those of you haven't ever read it, there's a brilliant book called Engineering in a Safer World that talks about systems theory and goes into systems theoretic process analysis. If you're a little bit of a nerd like me, I find that kind of thing quite interesting, and it's a very good way of looking at very complex systems. However, applying that to security is something that is being looked at, and potentially has some very strong options in the future in terms of how we do that. It's also consequent-based cybersecurity engineering. So Idaho National Laboratories came out with CCE. I believe it was the beginning of 2020. Again, a very interesting take on sort of merging the safety and engineering worlds with cybersecurity and being very about it. Interesting concept, and something that within RiskTech and personally, I'm finding a lot of time and space to look at. I think it's got some good legs to it. We also have sort of process hazard analysis, and we have that traditional HAZOP as well, and the levels of protection analysis. So I'll come and I'll talk a little bit about those in a second. We also have things like fault tree analysis. So we can use the fault trees from systems, and this is something that we tend to do a lot in sort of like the nuclear industries when we're involved in civil nuclear. We'll use the fault tree as part of our cybersecurity analysis so that we can see where the overlaps are, and we can see the different impacts and the different areas that can be targeted to create issues. We need that holistic approach. We need to make sure that we're looking at everything as a whole, and that from a security consultancy point of view, we're also considering the safety impacts and some of the environmental and personnel impacts, human factors in there as well, because that's a big element of security that tends to be overlooked. If you make it difficult for people to do their jobs, they tend to try and find ways around security. So that's a massive consideration for any consultancy that engages with you. And we also need to acknowledge that for a system to be truly safe and not cause harm, it also has to be secure. And, bringing it all together allows for this improved efficiency and cost savings, and that better protection for everyone. And as I've put here, security can protect that confidential information about systems from malicious and accidental compromise. So we're not just talking about the operational technology itself, but the information you hold about your OT systems as well needs to be protected. And on the OT side, we've got security protects the integrity and availability from the malicious hacks. And then we've got safety coming in, and that's protecting integrity and availability in those hazardous situations, making sure that it's operating correctly and that it's protecting people and the environment. So what have we done? So we started with what we knew. We listened, and obviously the areas and the industries that we work in generally have sort of like a pretty high level risk and pretty high level consequences if something goes wrong. And they basically said to us they needed to understand, they needed to feel comfortable, and they needed to get the language and what we were doing. They needed fast, efficient, high-level cyber risk assessments. They needed to be able to identify those gaps and quick wins and the direction of travel that they were taking. So as well as identifying where more detailed assessment is needed, they needed to get this overall view, and they needed that little bit of assistance in being able to work out where they needed to go next with all of this. We also found that people needed those in-depth analysis of systems that can present the levels of protection. They needed to be able to understand all of the different protection layers that are around their different systems. And they needed to be able to bring in additional protection as well in that rapidly changing environment. They needed to be able to understand how all of these Lego bricks all connect together. And they wanted cybersecurity risk management and governance advice. There's some clients and organizations are struggling to understand how to integrate this with their existing safety management systems and how to assess this and maintain their regulatory compliance. So we came up with a couple of different options based on this. Our first one is our CyHazOp, so our cyber hazard and operations process. And we adapted this very strongly to cybersecurity. It's based on that familiar look and feel of the traditional HazOp. And you can see in sort of like the bottom corner there, we've got that very traditional looking sort of HazOp chart. It's workshop based, and this is really important to us because we find that doing it on a workshop basis in the same way that you do a HazOp brings together all of the people that you need. One, to get the answers done quickly, but also then it starts to build security awareness in people that otherwise wouldn't be thinking about it. So at a very high level, we tend to look at the HazOp. We use the guide words have become assets within different nodes and different zones, and the deviations are there. They're parts of a kill chain for most of the different nodes that are there. So we're starting to take people through essentially an attack. We're doing almost a dry run on this attack, but we can do it quickly, and we can do it without using lots of technical language, but still produce the right information at the end of it. And we use this mostly for high-level risk assessments and design reviews. And you can see we kind of bring out sort of categories across different priorities, and we tend to put our recommendations into 4 different categories, and that's governance, procedure, physical, and technical. It kind of gives businesses a good way of separating out these activities for future strategic planning. We also developed something based on the LOPA as well. So again, LOPA is quite a familiar concept to people, and whilst in its true nature, LOPA can be a very mathematically advanced way of working. what we tried to do was take the pure concept of a LOPA, and say, okay, how do we present this in an easy way? How do we use this to benefit the cybersecurity of a system? So what we do during the cyber HAZOP is we look at all of these different scenarios, and we go through these kill chains, and then we sort of identify them that actually, for our own peace of mind, we need that little bit of extra detail, or for regulatory compliance, we need that little bit of extra detail, and we need to understand how raising or lowering of threat levels will impact our different controls. So this feeds out in something, we've used Bowtie as an example here, and it's a great way of representing these different controls and barriers and mitigations that we can have in place. And it's something we're quite excited to start sort of properly embedding and learning from. We've used it a couple of times, and it's gone down quite well. Finally, we've got that sort of security risk management side as well. We can come and help, and we've really sort of started to take that stop, listen, build a relationship before we start putting sort of proposals in, and really get to the nub of exactly what it is that organizations want from us, and then make sure that we're flexible enough and we have the resource and ability to get them what they need. So I'm sure you'll be pleased to hear we're reaching the end of me just talking at you all. So hopefully we can get some Q&As in a minute. But just as a quick summary, so the cybersecurity industry, we need to get better at communicating with our stakeholders, and that's from a cybersecurity consultant, somebody in the industry. When I started to properly look at this, that was quite a hard thing to realize that we need to get better at that. We need to use the right language to communicate, and this is that key attribute. And that we need to keep ensuring that safety and security are working hand in hand, especially when it comes to operational technology. And that aim is to create that safe and secure future for all of us. So thank you for listening. I'm going to hand back over to Steve. I hope that was useful, and here's some Q&As.
That's excellent. Thank you very much, Steve. Yes, we've got the Q&A sessions. We've got just over a quarter of an hour or so. So if you do have some questions from that, and I'm sure you'll have plenty, and then just please type them into the Q&A function. So just as we're waiting for some of those questions to come in, I actually had a couple of questions, Steve. You showed an interesting bit on that slide about the cyber HAZOP, and you showed how we grouped sort of recommendations into 4 categories. I can't remember exactly what they were, but it's like governance, technical, procedural, and something.
Governance, procedure,
physical. Can you give some, in general, can you give some specific examples of the sort of findings that come out? Are we seeing any sort of common themes, or is it very, very specific to the particular project that you're involved in?
No, so there are very much some sort of common themes that we're picking up, and you can see from the way that sort of the priorities are put over there. The high and mediums tend to sit in that technical area. They tend to be the things like making sure that sort of networking equipment is configured correctly, and things like change management is implemented correctly on sort of like the physical locking of firmware and ports and that kind of thing. So it tends to sit more in that very technical region. What you will notice, though, is that when we get into that low category of sort of priorities, we're looking very much at the governance and procedure side, and a little bit more on the physical side. And this is where we're seeing things like making sure that security and cybersecurity for OT is part of an overall approach in a business. It's really important that businesses have this overall approach and sort of this holistic view of what's going on. And in our experience, we've found a couple of different ways that businesses they're attempting it, but just slightly missing getting that connection. And that's where a business has a really, really good risk management system, but OT go and do their own thing. Or the other one is OT build their own thing, and then it doesn't fit or communicate with anything else. So there's some of the recommendations that we put in here from the HAZOPs are very much based around those kind of processes and understanding how it fits in that governance area. From the procedure point of view, this is really simple things that we can put in place. It's like making sure that supply chains have got a good onboarding process so that you know who's coming and going, and that you're removing engineer access when it's not needed, that you're auditing things on a regular basis and that kind of thing. And physical, again, really simple things like having key management solutions so that you know who has a key to a particular room and who's accessed it at a certain time. Just allows you to have both the audit and also the control of access over your OT systems. And I appreciate that can be difficult in a lot of industries to sort of develop that. But it's amazing how something as simple as sticking all your keys in a lockbox and having security sign them in and out can improve your security posture. It's quite a quick win and quite cheap, generally speaking.
Yeah. No, I get that. Okay. Yeah, just sort of waiting for some questions to come in. Yeah, the other question I had was you touched on some guidance coming out from the regulators, and I think you mentioned the UK HSE at the start and their sort of guidance document. So I was just thinking in general, what are the regulators of safety in major hazard industries? What are they? What sort of evidence are they looking for from operators of major hazard industries in terms of the potential impact of cybersecurity on safety and major accident hazards? What sort of evidence are they looking for?
So in terms of the evidence, I mean, I'll take the UK sort of health and safety executive as probably the easiest one to sort of describe, because they've got quite a well-developed concept of what they're looking for. In their sort of OG 86 guidance, they kind of talk about sort of having these sort of like security plans and having security risk assessments done. But one of the most key parts for them actually is identifying those most critical assets. The guidance is designed around industries, sort of major accident hazard industries, and also operators of essential systems. So it kind of fits within the Nist directive in the UK and Europe under those regulations. And again, it's making sure that businesses can demonstrate that they've considered the cybersecurity risks around their operational technology, making sure that there's some form of documentation there that can prove to a regulator or an inspector when they come in that they understand what is happening, they know what the cybersecurity risks are, even if these are at a high level, that they're aware of them and they have a plan to deal with them. The other interesting thing that when we deal with sort of the regulators, and I'm going to use the nuclear regulator here as a bit of an example, when we've engaged with them for this kind of thing, there's when international standards are at play and you're kind of using 61508, there are requirements there for security risk assessments.
Yeah.
And those security risk assessments largely need to be more holistic than I think it's being currently done. Security risk assessments for OT systems at the moment tend to be very tactical. They tend to be sort of vulnerability based, whereas what I'm getting the impression when I talk to regulators is that actually they're looking for that higher level understanding. They need businesses to properly comprehend the consequences and be able to quickly and efficiently identify their systems with the highest level of consequence. Yeah,
no, I can see that. And just sort of following on, I've got a question coming from Matthew, which I'll ask in just a second. But yeah, just following the theme we were just sort of touching on there before. I guess and I think it came up right at the start with one of the polls where there's probably one of the major perceptions is that this is all very complicated. And I guess and you touched on the regulator, like the HSC is asking for, I want to see a plan for how you're going to go about this. And is it therefore no surprise when you touched on one of your slides that what we're seeing quite a lot of is the requirement for a high level cybersecurity risk assessment to begin to get the plan together, to begin to eat the elephant? Are all those things linked together?
They are, yes, and that's one of the reasons that we spent time last year developing the SciHazOp. And HAZOP's got a fantastic sort of reputation and use case for safety, and using that kind of technique means that we can very quickly do a risk assessment on systems. Obviously, it varies depending on the complexity of the system and the size of the potential asset and site that we're looking at. But being to sort of assets and sort of like conduits between those different assets and how things communicate, we can very quickly start to work through that and give a really high-level understanding of what the current situation is, and give some really good recommendations on where they go next. And it's that approach that forms the basis of what regulators are looking for.
Yeah, got it. Okay, that's great. Thank you. Okay, so we've got a couple of questions from Matthew.
Mm-hmm.
How are we handling legacy systems in the sense that, the technology still works,
Yeah.
but it is a legacy system. So are you addressing these systems?
We are, and I think the best phrase that I can use is we are handling them very carefully. As I alluded to earlier on in sort of the in the webinar, legacy systems can present some particular problems when you try and apply modern approaches to sort of like IT cybersecurity or even modern OT cybersecurity, where you can't update things and where you can't sort of like move forward with security directly on the systems. You really need to start having that holistic view of security. You need to be looking at what you can do in terms of your process and procedures, make it as you risk it as far as you can in terms of those procedural elements and the governance around them. If you can add some extra physical security to it, and again, I sort of mentioned one of the easiest ways of doing a lot of sort of access control, if you can't do it directly on the system, is to have some form of access control system on the room or the location upon which it's located. So yeah, very much the focus on the legacy systems doesn't tend to be forcing updates or upgrades. It tends to be making the best of the situation that you can, identifying some of the vulnerabilities and some of how they're linked to existing systems that may be slightly more advanced, and making sure that the communication paths between those two are not vulnerable to being used so that cyber attacks spread around.
Okay, thank you. And then the second question from Matthew, coming from forensic computing background, are you looking at malicious deliberate acts against safety and security of process systems?
Yes. Yeah, so coming back to kind of some of the findings that we're picking up with a lot of organizations, that ability to have sort of like the forensic post-incident approach and being able to work out what happened, but also being able to pick that up at the same time that it's happening, it is a gap area within most businesses. They'll put a solution in, and it will be a great solution, but it may not be connected to all of their procedures correctly. It may need a bit of extra work to get it working in a way that actually gives you sort of usable event analysis information at the end of the day. But yeah, it's definitely all connected.
Okay, thank you. And then we've got a question from Fahad. It's a really good question, actually. What part are OT equipment manufacturers playing to mitigate the risk? As in my experience, a renowned vendor is still selling plants with Windows 7 based HMIs. Do you reckon it's the organization's responsibility as well to ensure what equipment they are purchasing? As in some cases, cybersecurity is completely bypassed when OT equipment purchases are made.
Yeah, exactly. And this comes back a little bit to the sort of like those different holistic views of the domain. So supply chain security was an important part there. To answer the first part of that question in terms of sort of like manufacturers and the responsibilities they have versus the organizations that are purchasing them, it's a little bit of both actually in terms of responsibility. The more organizations start pushing cybersecurity requirements and general security requirements on the manufacturers, the more the manufacturers will start to sort of follow suit with that.
Yeah.
Because obviously that's an important part of the market model. In terms of the manufacturers, a lot of the manufacturers are getting much better. When I've engaged with different sort of vendors and stuff, they are getting better at understanding what's needed. But there's that cost balance part of them developing something, and if people aren't asking for it, they may not always develop it. And that's very much a personal opinion. I'm not speaking for any vendors here, but that's generally how you see this kind of thing work. And if you go back several years, this is exactly how it was working in the IT side of things as well. So yeah, it comes back to that maturity of the OT side of things. It just needs to catch up a little bit.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so unless there are any more questions, which I don't think there are, we'll wrap up now. So what we will do is make a recording available to everybody later this week. And when you leave the webinar, you should actually automatically receive a survey in your browser. It literally takes a few seconds really to complete that, and we really do appreciate everybody's feedback. And if you've got any questions arising what you've heard today, or you'd like some information on any of our services, then you can simply email us. I think if Steve just advances the slide, there's some email addresses on that next slide. Or it's just as easy to go onto our website, and there's a ton of forms literally on every page on the website. Just fill the inquiry form in and get in contact. And I think at the start I did mention Steve's email address is on there as well. I'm sure he'll be more than happy to take any requests directly from you. Yep, great. So thank you, Steve, once again, and thank you everyone for your attention. We're very grateful for you taking the time out of your busy schedule to listen in to us today. The next webinar is on Wednesday next week, so that's Wednesday the 13th, at the slightly earlier time, so that's 1 o'clock UK time. We started at 3 o'clock today, so 2 hours earlier. And it's actually about introduction to modeling physical effects such as fire, explosion and toxic gas dispersion. So hopefully you can join us for that one too. So in the meantime, please stay safe and stay secure and enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.